guys, I swear on everything that is good and holy. This is the second time I've had to film this because all my footage got ruined yesterday because the cicadas were so loud and I didn't even catch it, and it was like insanity. And now the neighbors, lawn care people are out and they are leaf blowing and okay, so we're gonna try this again. Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I have a super special video for you. I'm going to be talking about everything Hamilton. I'm doing a Q&A, everything you've ever wanted to know, so buckle up, hold on tight, and get ready because it's gonna be super fun. All right, here we go. My first question is, what exactly was your job? My job at Hamilton was that of the swing dresser. So that doesn't mean that I dressed only the swings. Hamilton utilizes swings a little bit more than other shows that I've worked on. So the difference between a swing and an understudy is that usually an understudy is for one role. So you would only know that one role and you would be ready to take that over. A swing is someone who can do multiple roles in the show, and Hamilton uses that both with the actors and also with people that work backstage. I was the swing dresser, which meant I knew all the dresser track roles and as well as the laundry track, and then I could jump in and do any of those roles whenever they were needed. What is a swing? So a swing, you know, I just kind of went over that a little bit. So a swing is someone who takes over for another person when that person is gone, whether it be due to illness or sometimes they're out for a long time due to, you know, personal reasons or whatever, or they might just be on vacation. The swing person can slide into their role and do that role. It's a super valuable position. It's really hard. Everything that you're doing is always changing every single day. So one day you might be running one track and one day you might be running a different track. It can be really hectic, but it's really, really fun, and I actually really enjoyed it so much. It was such a fun job. What is a track? So a track is the way that we describe the role of a certain dresser. It's kind of like their roadmap for what they do throughout the show. So it's basically like, you might say on stage, the role of Hamilton, and then backstage you would say dresser track 8. And so it's just sort of like that person's roadmap for the show. It doesn't change. I mean, there might be like minor changes that happen over time, but it's pretty much set in stone. You do the same thing every night. You stick to your track. It's very organized and it's very methodical. So that is what a track is. What is the process of learning a new track? It's long and arduous. So the process of learning a new track is very well organized. It's not just like, well, just get in there and see if you can do it. So usually what happens is you're scheduled ahead of time to follow the dresser who does the track for a minimum of 3 times. Usually that's what they like to stick to, and most of the time you're well prepared with 3 times. Occasionally with some of the more complicated tracks, you can request to have an extra day or 2 to follow that person. With some of the tricky ones, you definitely need it. So the first time you follow, usually I would just observe. You get the existing notes, and sometimes they were written a long time ago and they're kind of worthless, or things have changed, or the person who took them isn't on the show anymore, and the way that they did things is really different than the way that the current dresser does that track. So it's usually just kind of like a jumping off point. So I started with those notes and I would just quietly follow the dresser for the first time and just observe and kind of watch what was happening. And usually it's like a fire hydrant. Like there's so much information coming at you and so many things happening that you just kind of have to like take in as much as you possibly can. Usually between that first time and the second time, I would tend to start to revise the notes and start to internalize them. And so the second time, then you really pay attention, and usually I was doing a lot of revising during that second time. And then between the second and the third time, I usually like to take a day to go home and study, and then I would write my own notes in a spiral notebook like this. And during that time, I would really flesh it out. So for instance, this is Story of Tonight, and you can see that it says Washington remove his cape and his cream coat, which that is the parchment jacket, and then you hang the discards, and then you're grabbing a couple things, and then you're heading upstairs. I would write them out underneath the song, and I would number the pages so I knew which page I was on, and I would be really detailed, and I always wrote everything in pencil so that I could erase things and make any kind of adjustments that I needed to. Then the third time, I would do the track and that dresser would follow me. So usually by this point in time, you should have this pretty well memorized. Some of the tracks you don't need to have them memorized because you have enough time in between things that you can check your notes and see where you're at. But other ones you definitely needed to have everything internalized and memorized. And I remember when I was learning the Hamilton track that I would literally be just studying all day long, because I'm not the type of person that can just not study for a test and go in and ace it. I have to study my butt off. So I would literally be walking down the street to like go pick up my daughter from school or whatever, and I would just be like, second act presets, stage right alcove. 1, burr black cape on the right hook. 2, Washington tricorn on the right hook. Sword and sheath on the floor. Number 3, refill water. Like, I would literally just go through every single step, and I would just memorize. And so then when you go to do that track for the first time by yourself, but with that dresser following you, you have it internalized and you're ready to go. Then after that happens, usually I would take more notes on these note cards, and then I would study again so that I totally knew it by heart, and I would text that dresser and say, hey, when this change happens, are you to the left of this person or to the right of this person? And then I could write that in my notes so I would have everything just completely written down. It's tons of memorization, there's a lot of visualization, and a lot of just having to trust yourself. It's really hard and it's really scary. What is it like doing a track for the first time? Terrifying. It's so terrifying. Oh, I'm like literally getting goosebumps thinking about it. I remember the first time that I did Hamilton, and I was so nervous at the top of the show. I thought I was gonna throw up. Like, everything is depending on you, and you just have to basically shoot blind and hope that you are doing the right thing. It's scary. It's scary. What, if any, was the biggest blooper? So there were a couple of them. I know before I got there, I guess Wayne Brady, when he was playing Burr, hurt his ankle, like either sprained it or broke it in the middle of a song, and somehow they got him off and the swing dressed and put in his place in the middle of the song. I wasn't there. This is just lore at this point in time, but I think that's crazy. We definitely had situations like that where we had to get somebody into a role really, really fast if there was an injury or something happened. There was one time when there was a swing on for Burr when I was working, and he kicked his shoe. There's like, he does like a high kick, and his shoe flew off and went into the audience. But I mean, depending on who you're talking to, that's not necessarily a blooper. That's a fan's greatest dream come true. There was another thing that happened where there was a swing on for one of the Schuyler sisters, and it's at the top of the show, and the Schuyler sisters are standing in the surround, which is like that balcony that goes around the top. It's like the second level of the stage. And she's holding a lantern, and she dropped it onto Woman One's head, and it was kind of a disaster. Of course, she felt terrible, and Woman One felt not great either, but she was such a champ. They actually had to hold the show because there was broken glass, and they had to make sure that Amanda, who was woman one, was okay that night. She definitely got the Gold Star Award. It was pretty crazy. I think personally the biggest blooper that ever happened, and maybe there's other ones that other dressers were like, oh, I totally was pinch hitting for you and you didn't even know it. I remember one time I was doing the Burr Washington track, and Akron came out of his dressing room at Places. He had spilled coffee on the ruffles of his shirt, and we have several sets of those. So he took off his costume. I went to get him a second shirt, put the shirt on, put the costume back on, sent him out on stage. And then later in the show, I think it's one of the first times he goes in to meet Washington, he leaned over and I saw the glint of the hardware on his elastic suspenders, and I was like, no! And I ran downstairs and I got his parchment vest and put the parchment vest back over. And I think that was like the biggest blooper that I ever had, and I felt really dumb about it. The other thing that happens actually to everybody at some point in time, there is a door on the back side of the set that when it's open, if you walk by it, you can be seen by the audience, and it's not open all the time. So if I was doing a track that I wasn't used to, and I wasn't, like most of the time I knew when the door was open, but there was I remember one time I was doing a track, maybe it was for the first time, or I don't know, maybe I just wasn't paying attention, and the door was open, and I was walking and I literally, like my body caught me before my brain did, and I was like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And I just walked in front of that door, and one of the other dressers laughed so hard because he's like, we've literally all done it and no one will ever see you. But maybe you were there that night when you're like, wait, why is that lady walking? She's not in the cast. Confused. Did you ever meet Lin-Manuel Miranda? No, I didn't. I know that he was at the show, I think right before I started, maybe like the late summer before I started, but I never did meet him. I always thought that I would. I did, however, meet Alex Lackmore, and how we met was really funny. The backstage quarters are very tight, and I was downstairs in the basement, and I was coming out of a dressing room and he was coming down the hall, and we literally bashed into each other. Doesn't remember that I was the dresser who crashed into him in the hallway, but so I did meet him, and he is a lovely individual. What is the weirdest skill that you learned? The weirdest skill that I learned was how to tie a jabot. So my friend Jessica, who I worked with at Lyric Opera, is so good at what she does, and she was like, I'm gonna teach you how to tie a jabot and you're gonna be amazing. And so that is the weirdest skill that I learned that I am like the best at. And there would be people that would hunt me down and be like, can you please tie this jabot for me? Or I would be tying it and they wouldn't really be paying attention, and then they would look at themselves in the mirror and be like, what? That is amazing. So I'm pretty proud of myself that I learned how to do that, and I'll do a tutorial someday so you too can become a champion of a skill that you don't need to have anymore. What is it like to dress Hamilton? It's great. There's definitely that thing that you're always thinking, I'm dressing the star of the show and I can't mess up, but he's so generous and kind that I think I could have put him in a basketball jersey and he would have made it work. What is the hardest track? The hardest track is either Hamilton King, because it's very busy. It's a lot of running up and down the stairs, and that's just the way that the track was set up. So it's actually a pretty difficult track physically. The other track that is the most difficult on Hamilton Chicago is one of the male ensemble dresser tracks. There's two of them. One of them is fairly easy, and we refer to that as the granny track. That's just kind of the name for any like slightly easy track backstage on any show. And the other one is pretty difficult. I actually really loved that track, and I had a lot of fun because it just keeps you so busy for the whole show that the show goes really quick and you just have to stay on your toes, and I really liked that about it. There were people that before I started, they're like, you're gonna hate it, it's so stressful. And I didn't actually, I really enjoyed it. That said, if you do get behind on anything, it will crumble like a house of cards. So you really have to pay attention and know when you have a breather where you can look at your notes and when to have sections memorized. So it's between those two. I think on the other end of the spectrum, the granny tracks are hard for me because if there are breaks, you really have to pay attention to when your next cue is. It's not just like do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. You have do this, break for a song and a half, but you have to pay attention to the cue or you're gonna miss it. Sometimes those tracks were harder for me because I would just have to really pay so much closer attention, and that stressed me out more than having a really active track. What does it look like backstage? Organized chaos. It is dark. There are props, there are people, there are costumes, there is so much going on backstage all the time. Everything backstage has a choreography as well, and you have to really get used to that. What is day work? So day work is something that happens on every show, and day work is done during the day. So it's everything that you need to do to prep the costumes for the show in the evening. On every show, it's the same. There's laundry, repairs, maintenance, and special projects, and that's kind of the same over every single show that you'll ever work on. On Hamilton, it's split up into different like assignments, and we usually rotated those. So those were broken into shirts, so ironing the men's shirts, the ensemble, principal men, principal women, shoes, and the crossover. So all the costumes that are on stage, like behind the set on stage, and all of them have their own unique challenges. Some of them are harder than others. And so with each one of those, you have to make sure that the repairs are taken care of, sewing back on buttons if there's rips, making sure that everything is sprayed and sanitized and ready for the next show. When you do shirts, you have to iron every single shirt that every single principal male has worn throughout the show. There are a lot of them. And then making sure that everybody has their laundry and all of that kind of stuff is taken care of. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of day work to do, a lot. And day work typically happens between noon and 5. It's a separate crew that comes in and does that, sort of. So some of the dressers do it, some of the swings do it, and I worked as a full-time day worker from September of 2019 till the close of the show, and then before that I would swing in for people that were gone or whatever. Then there's also people that just only do day work. That's the only thing that they do. How large is the run crew and how many dressers are there? So the run crew is huge. I love this question because this is definitely insider baseball. So there are stage managers, there are sound engineers, there are electricians, there are people that run the automation, there are props people, there are wardrobe people and supervisors. So as far as the tech side of it, like the stagehand side, I don't honestly know. I'd say there's a minimum of 20 because there's people that are downstairs and that don't ever come upstairs. And then there's people that are front of house and you rarely ever see them. And then there's also dance captains. Yeah, so there's all that kind of stuff too. Then there's also the orchestra. And then how many dressers? There are 8 dresser tracks and a laundry position. So those are always filled, as well as 2 supervising positions on the show. And then there were a few swings. That's how many dressers there are at any given time. Was there cast drama? What was the most stressful, busy time in the show backstage? So starting with You'll Be Back, the first one, you are starting to get people into ball skirts, and those changes are really fast, so you have to kind of get people in and out. So any of the battle scenes, getting everybody ready to go on for the ball scene, and then that's during the first act, and then during like Yorktown, there's just a ton of stuff happening. And then in the second act, depending on what track you're on, there's quite a lot to do during Hurricane, especially if you're dressing man 5, because he's going on and off as Mariah Reynolds' husband, and then I think he does something else. So there's quite a lot of like back and forth and on and off. So that's pretty hectic. And insane. And usually when there's nobody on stage, that's when, like, you know, if it's just like 1 or 2 people on stage, that's when it's mayhem backstage. During Quiet Uptown 2, there's a lot of getting people in and out. And then there's also during the Philip Eaker scene during the play, there is an actor dress that you get woman 2 into. No one ever realizes that it's even happening. It's this beautiful, like, deep turquoise colored dress. Tell me down below if you have even seen that. I had seen the show multiple times and I was like, wait, what? I don't. And so it's definitely something that she gets into and then gets out of really, really fast. So that was another kind of hectic time. What was the hardest thing when you first started? I think the hardest thing was learning everybody. The women's costumes for the ensemble are really tricky because they are all the same color, so everything just sort of looks like this swath of parchment, and I think that made me really confused. I think the other thing that was really funny when I first started was that a lot of the women's ensemble had A names, so there was Amanda, Sam Aberman, Amber, Alexia, and Sandra. I think the other thing was just learning the backstage and the building. Every time you learn a new theater, it's really, really hard. And just learning everybody's names and kind of being the new person sucks. It's just really hard and you have a really steep learning curve. So I think that was the hardest thing at the beginning. What is your favorite memory? So I started the same week that Tamar Green started, and he played Washington the entire time that I was there. I think maybe there was someone there for like a week when I first started, but I barely remember that. And he and I really bonded through being the new kids on the block, and during That Would Be Enough, he and I would do our own version backstage, and it's just like one of my favorite memories because it was so fun. Like sometimes we'd be super cheesy and, you know, like just be so into it and like silly and whatever. And then other times we would just like get really into the vocals. And so that's like one of my favorite memories. Another one of my favorite memories is every single time I was in the King's dressing room during the cabinet battle where I think it's Madison Says France. He would always ask me a question, just like so silly, that would line it up perfectly with me saying France at the exact same time that he said it. So he'd be like, where's the Eiffel Tower located? And I'd be like, France? Or who won the World Cup in blah, blah, blah year? And I'd be like, France. Just whatever. It was silly and fun, and that's like one of my favorite memories. How are TV and theater different? So TV can be really, really hard, but it's a lot of hurrying up and then waiting for a really long time. And you kind of just don't really know how your day is gonna go. And so the days are really, really long. But in theater, you're doing the exact same thing every single day, but it's very choreographed and it's live. So things can go wrong and you have to think on your feet really, really fast. So I think those are the two major differences between dressing for TV and dressing for theater. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my Q&A session. Please join me next week for part 2, where I have a lot more questions to answer, and I hope you really enjoyed this. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe, like this video, and I'm also on Instagram. I'm at Sommarblomma there as well. Comment down below if you have more questions you'd like me to include next week. I'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching. Bye. Also, very funny, I was at the beach the other day and this lady was like, oh, those are such cute overalls. I used to wear them all the time, but I stopped wearing overalls when I turned 30. You'll get there someday. I should tell her.